Hi boys and girls, today you're going to be starting your dragon eye project. Now the first thing you're going to do is you're going to draw a lemon shape or an eyeball shape in the middle of your paper. I'm using Sharpie just so you guys can see, but you should be using pencil. When you draw the shape, you need to make sure that it is pretty big. The smaller the eye, the more time you're going to have to spend making scales, because we're going to have scales all around here. So if we have a really tiny eye, that means more time you have to spend drawing scales, and nobody wants to waste their time doing too much work. So once we have this, we're going to make a line above it and a line below it. So now it kind of looks like we have an eyeball with an eyeball inside of it. And we're going to do that one more time. So we have an eyeball with an eyeball inside of it, with an eyeball inside of it. And now we're going to do kind of the same shape, but it's going to come from the edge of the paper, go up, come back down, and run off the edge. So my line touches the edge of the paper. It's not floating out here somewhere. And we're going to go a little bit down from that, not touching this line we just drew. And we're going to do the same thing below it. Come over to the edge of the paper, but don't touch that line. Now, the next lines we're going to draw, they are going to run off the paper for sure. They're going to start at one edge, follow the same curve as the other lines, the curve, and run it off the paper. Same thing over here. Follow the curve and run it off the paper. As you can see, or you may not have noticed yet, my lines are getting bigger as they go out. So the scales by my eyeball are really tiny, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger as they go out. So if you drew it as big as I did, you're probably done by now. I'm hoping you're done by now. Now, boys and girls, the next step is going to be to draw the scales. Now, this part gets a little tricky because we need to pay close attention to how I draw these scales. You're going to start with a square. And I'm going to start right here at the corner of my eye. And you have to start the top of the square at this line and end the bottom of the square at this line. So it goes line, and then the top is here and the bottom is here. But we want to round the corners of our square. So squares usually have really pointy corners, but on this one, we're going to make them a little rounded. Kind of like ovals, square-ish ovals in there. And the next square I draw is right up against the last one. There's no space, so I'm not going to do this one and then space and make another one. This is right up against the other one. The top touches this line, the bottom touches this line, and the sides touch each other. There are no scales that float off in space by themselves. Now, when we get to this point, we need to start doing the bottom ones. So, skip the corners for now because they're a little tricky, and just do your squares along the bottom. Make sure the top hits that top line, the bottom hits the bottom line, and the sides touch the other scales. And the size of my lines determines how big or small my scales are. Now, I didn't do the corners, and that's okay. They kind of turned into their own shape. We shouldn't try to fit a square in there because trying to fit a square into a triangle-ish shape isn't gonna work. So now that this layer is done, we're gonna move out to the next one. And I don't want my lines to line up exactly. So my first square, I'm gonna start it in the middle of the last one I drew. So some people that have done this lesson before thought it would be a good idea to take their pencil and just make lines going out. But that's not going to look like scales. It's going to look like you're lazy and you took a shortcut. And I know that none of you are lazy. So we're gonna keep going, keep drawing our scales. And if some of them line up, that's all right, but we don't want them all to line up. So none of you should be taking your pencil and saying, well, I'm just gonna do this, because it's gonna look more like a sun than a dragon eye. And these dragon eyes turn out really cool. So don't ruin it on purpose. Okay. So I think you guys get the idea now. We're gonna keep going, keep filling it up until there's squares in every single one. And as you can see, my squares get bigger and bigger as they go out. And the ones on this side, they might not even see the tops. You might just draw the sides and curve so we have an idea of where the top is, and then just let it go. Curve, curve, and it's done. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, once your dragon eye is all filled up with scales like this, you'll see that I didn't skip any rows. I don't have a blank row in between. It's scales, 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 scales. And when I get to this row that ran off the page, I have the scales running off the page too. So this line would continue up here, but it doesn't. So all the scales do is we see the bottom of them, but not the top. So now you're ready to add his pupil. That's the part you see out of. That's kind of another eyeball shape, but it goes up and down instead of side to side. And then you may color that in with Sharpie. And once that's done, you're gonna get a black crayon. And remember, this is supposed to be pencil on yours, not Sharpie. This is the only part on yours that's Sharpie. You're gonna take a black crayon and you're gonna cover all your pencil lines that are the scale, but not the pupil. Okay, boys and girls, get to work.